You are standing at your window on a quiet afternoon, and you notice something strange. A bird is sitting on your fence, not eating, not drinking, not moving, just sitting there, looking at your yard. You watch it for a minute, wondering what it is doing. It is completely still. Its eyes scan slowly across the lawn, the feeder, the shrubs, the house. The bird seems to be doing absolutely nothing. You might think the bird is resting or tired, or maybe just taking a break from flying. But if you really understood what was happening, you would realize that the bird is doing one of the most important things it does all day. It is conducting a silent, careful, meticulous evaluation of your entire yard. It is judging your space. And that judgment will determine whether it trusts your yard enough to eat, drink, bathe, and bring its family here. The bird that appears to be doing nothing is actually engaged in one of the most sophisticated assessment processes in nature. And understanding what that bird is really doing will change how you see every moment your birds spend on your fence. Most people misunderstand fence sitting because they do not recognize it as the serious evaluation it truly is. They see a bird on the fence and they think, well, the bird is just sitting there. Maybe it is tired. Maybe it is enjoying the view. Maybe it is waiting for something. But birds are not casual creatures. Birds do not have the luxury of sitting around and doing nothing. Every moment a bird spends sitting still is a moment it is not eating, not feeding its young, not building fat reserves for migration. Time is precious to a bird. Energy is precious. So when a bird chooses to sit on your fence and do nothing, that bird has made a deliberate decision that this moment of stillness and observation is worth the energy cost and the time cost. The bird has decided that evaluating your yard is critical enough to warrant this investment. Here is what the bird is actually doing when it sits on your fence and looks at your yard. It is gathering information. Massive amounts of information. The bird is looking at the physical layout of the yard and asking itself questions. Where is the food source? Where is the water? Where are the escape routes? Where are the safe perches? Where are the hiding spots? Which areas are exposed and dangerous? Which areas offer protective cover? The bird is building or updating a mental map of your yard. But the bird is not just looking at the physical space, it is also smelling. The bird's nostrils are working constantly, detecting predator scents, chemical contamination, decomposition, mold, human activity. The bird is integrating smell information with visual information. It is asking itself, does this yard smell safe? Are there predators here? Has something changed since I last visited? The bird is also listening. Its ears are alert for alarm calls from other birds, for predator sounds, for unusual noises. The bird is integrating auditory information with visual and olfactory information, creating a comprehensive threat assessment. But there is another layer to the stillness that most people never consider. The bird is also watching the humans. If you are inside looking out, the bird is looking at you looking at it. The bird is reading your body language, your movements, your energy. Are you frozen at the window watching the bird with intense focus? Or are you casually going about your business ignoring the bird? The bird can sense the difference. A human that is intensely watching the bird represents potential threat or unpredictability. A human that is ignoring the bird represents predictability and comfort. The bird is assessing not just whether your yard is physically safe, but whether your human presence is manageable. Can the bird relax while you are there? Or is your energy too unpredictable? Let me explain the specific sequence of what a bird evaluates when it sits on your fence. First, the bird scans for immediate threats. Is there a cat hiding in the shrubs? Is there a hawk circling overhead? Are there any sudden movements that signal danger? This first assessment takes only seconds. If the bird detects immediate threat, it will fly away without ever staying on the fence. But if the immediate threat assessment clears, the bird moves to the second phase. Now it can afford to relax slightly and do a more detailed evaluation. The bird begins studying the layout of your yard in detail. It is memorizing or updating its memory of feeder location, water source location, escape route directions, safe perch positions. This detailed study takes longer. This is when you see the bird sitting still on the fence for what seems like no purpose at all. The bird is actually very busy. The third phase of evaluation involves chemical assessment. The bird is sampling the smell profile of your yard. It is using its incredibly sensitive olfactory system to detect predator scents, human activity scents, chemical contamination, decomposition, mold presence. This chemical assessment might take a minute or more. The bird sits perfectly still while its nose is doing this detailed chemical reading. From your perspective, the bird is just sitting there. From the bird's perspective, it is running a complete contamination and danger scan. The fourth phase involves social assessment. The bird is observing whether other birds are already using your yard safely. If the bird sees the bright red cardinal eating peacefully at the feeder and the yellow sparrow bathing contentedly in the bird bath, the fence-sitting bird gets important information. Other birds trust this yard. Other birds are eating and drinking without incident. This is powerful information that suggests the yard is genuinely safe. There is a fifth phase that most people never think about. The bird on the fence is also waiting. It is waiting to see how long you stay at the window watching it. It is waiting to see if you suddenly move or make noise or frighten it. It is waiting to observe your behavioral patterns. If you watch the bird for 30 seconds, then go about your business, the bird learns that your attention is brief and non-threatening. If you stay at the window watching intently for several minutes, the bird feels more observed and therefore potentially more threatened. If you suddenly open a door or make a loud noise, the bird is evaluating whether this is typical yard behavior or unusual. The bird is testing you. It is asking, "Can I trust that this human will behave predictably?" The bird might sit on your fence for a minute or two while running all these evaluations. During that time, it is not resting. It is not lazy. It is not wasting time. It is conducting a sophisticated threat and opportunity assessment that will influence every decision it makes about your yard for the next weeks and months. Here is something that will change how you think about fence sitting. The longer a bird sits on your fence, the more thorough and serious the evaluation is. A bird that sits for 5 seconds is doing a quick visual scan. A bird that sits for 30 seconds is doing a detailed layout assessment and threat check. A bird that sits for several minutes is doing a deep evaluation that might include waiting out a potential threat, watching other birds, assessing weather conditions, and integrating all this information into a comprehensive yard assessment. Different bird species have different fence-sitting durations. A bold blue jay might sit for only a few seconds before committing to eating. A nervous sparrow might sit for much longer, running multiple evaluations before feeling confident enough to approach the feeder. There is also a pattern to fence-sitting that most people completely miss. Birds often fence-sit at specific times of day. Early morning fence-sitting is the most intense and serious. Birds are hungry and sleepy after the night, making them more cautious and more thorough in evaluation. They will spend more time on the fence because the stakes feel higher. Midday fence-sitting is often briefer because the bird has already established that the day is safe. Evening fence-sitting happens as birds prepare to roost. It has a different quality than morning sitting. The bird is not deciding whether to feed as much as it is choosing between roosting here or going elsewhere. The fence becomes a resting place between feeding and roosting. Weather also affects fence-sitting behavior dramatically. On clear, calm mornings, birds sit for shorter periods because visibility is good and evaluation is fast. On cloudy, overcast, or windy mornings, birds sit for much longer because they cannot see as clearly and therefore need more time to evaluate. On cold mornings, birds might shorten fence sitting because they are too cold and need to eat quickly to generate body heat. On hot afternoons, birds might sit longer because the heat creates lethargy and they are less urgent about feeding. The fence sitting adapts to circumstances, but it is always happening. It is always an evaluation. Here is what makes fence sitting particularly powerful for understanding bird trust. A bird that sits on your fence in the rain, in the cold, in poor visibility, in stressful conditions, is telling you something important. That bird is willing to invest extra evaluation time because your yard is important enough to warrant that investment. A bird that flies away without ever landing on the fence is telling you that your yard does not seem worth the evaluation effort. The fence is the stage where birds make the decision about whether your yard deserves their commitment. Different birds use fence sitting differently based on their personality and experience level. A young, inexperienced bird that has never seen your yard before will fence sit longer and more carefully than an adult bird that has been coming to your yard for months. The young bird is learning everything from scratch. The experienced bird already has a detailed mental map and only needs to do a quick refresh evaluation. A dominant, bold bird will fence sit briefly because it is confident enough to commit quickly. A subordinate, nervous bird will fence sit extensively because it needs more confidence before lowering its guard. The fence is where you can see each bird's personality expressed through its evaluation process. Now here is something deeply interesting about fence sitting and fear. When birds are unusually afraid, they fence sit longer. If a hawk has been spotted in the neighborhood, birds will sit on your fence for extended periods, doing extra threat checks before committing to the vulnerable act of eating. If a new predator has appeared, birds will fence sit with increased intensity. If something has changed in the yard, birds will spend more time on the fence evaluating the change. The fence becomes a safety observation post, where the bird gathers enough information to feel confident that lowering itself to eat is not going to be a deadly mistake. There is a beautiful synchronicity in fence-sitting behavior that shows how birds are all connected in their evaluations. When one bird sits on your fence and completes a thorough evaluation, other birds are watching. When that bird commits to eating and nothing bad happens, other birds get the signal that the yard is safe. This is why, after one brave cardinal sits on your fence, evaluates thoroughly, and then eats peacefully, suddenly the yellow sparrows will arrive. They have been watching the cardinal's evaluation process. They have seen the cardinal commit. They have learned from the cardinal's risk-taking that the yard is worth their trust. Fence-sitting is also deeply connected to the bird's internal state. A hungry bird might fence-sit more briefly because hunger overrides caution. A bird that has already eaten well might fence-sit longer because it can afford to be more cautious and selective. A bird that is building a nest and needs extra calories will fence-sit with different intensity than a bird that is preparing for migration and needs to be extra careful about food safety. The fence reveals the bird's internal priorities through how long and intensely it evaluates. Let me tell you something that will make you see fence-sitting as the profound behavior it truly is. Every time a bird sits on your fence and does nothing, it is making life and death decisions. It is deciding whether eating from your feeder is worth the risk of dropping to a vulnerable position. It is deciding whether your yard is trustworthy. It is deciding whether to invite other birds to visit. It is deciding whether to bring its family here. These decisions will ripple forward for weeks and months. A bird that trusts your yard after thorough fence-sitting evaluation will visit dozens of times and bring other birds with it. A bird that evaluates your yard from the fence and decides it is not trustworthy, will avoid it entirely and warn other birds. The stillness on the fence is not laziness. It is the most important work the bird does. It is the moment when your yard is being judged, and that judgment will determine the entire ecology of bird activity in your space. When you finally understand what fence sitting really is, you will start to see it as a sacred moment. The bird on your fence is not ignoring you. It is not wasting time. It is not just taking a break. It is evaluating your world. It is deciding whether to trust you. It is conducting a complex assessment that involves visual threat detection, olfactory contamination detection, auditory threat monitoring, spatial layout memorization, social observation, human behavior assessment, and weather adaptation, all while appearing to do absolutely nothing. This is why understanding fence sitting changes everything. You realize that the bird that seems to be doing nothing is actually doing everything. And the moments when birds sit on your fence in stillness and silence are actually moments of the most intense bird activity possible. The next time you see a bird on your fence looking at your yard, do not ignore it. Watch it carefully. See how long it sits. Notice when it moves its head. Notice when it relaxes slightly. You are witnessing a being making a life or death decision about your space, and that decision will determine whether your yard becomes a trusted sanctuary or a place birds avoid. The fence sitting is not empty time. It is the moment when your yard is being truly seen and evaluated. And what that bird decides might just change everything about your relationship with the natural world.